My husband didn't marry a fool, but he sure thought I was one. When I found that conversation open on his iPad, an email to his divorce attorney, my blood went cold. We go for a split. I keep partial equity in the restaurants. That includes the IP, recipes, menus, systems. She won't fight it. IP. Like my family's soul was a trademark to be bargained. Like 10 years of marriage meant nothing. Like the 3 bistros I'd built from my parents' legacy were just assets to be divided. He was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. I'm Margaret, 38 years old, and I've spent my entire life in kitchens. Not by choice at first. When you're the daughter of immigrant restaurant owners, you don't get to choose. You work. My parents, Maria and Leo Rossi, came to this country with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and my grandmother Rosa's handwritten recipes. They were barely 22 when they opened the first bistro with borrowed money and more hope than sense. I learned to roll pasta before I could spell my name. By age 10, I was helping during dinner rush. By 15, I knew every recipe by heart, not written down, mind you. Never written, that was the family rule. The recipes stay in the family, my father would say, wiping flour from his hands. They're the real value. Anyone can own a building. Not everyone can make this food. My mother would nod, adding, "These recipes are our blood, Margaret. They're what makes us special." When I turned 25, they officially passed the business to me. 3 locations by then, all profitable, all known for one thing: our authentic Italian cuisine that somehow tasted like home, even to people who'd never been to Italy. That's when I met Colin. He was 31, charming, and everything I thought I wanted. Sharp suits, business degree, talked about scaling and market penetration like he was some kind of restaurant guru. He swept me off my feet with promises of expansion and taking the bistros to the next level. We married after 2 years of dating. I made him co-owner of the business, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You trust them with everything. But I wasn't stupid about it. My parents had raised me to understand the difference between business ownership and family legacy. Colin became co-owner of the restaurant properties, equipment, and operations, but the recipes, those stayed exactly where they'd always been, in my memory and my family's hearts. The recipes aren't written down anywhere, I'd explained to him early in our marriage. It's family tradition, passed down mother to daughter, learned by watching and tasting, not by reading. He'd laughed it off then. "Very romantic, babe, but we should probably document them at some point, for insurance purposes." I'd always deflected. "Someday," I'd say, "when I'm ready." For 8 years, I ran the kitchens while he handled the business side. I created the menus, trained the staff, maintained the quality. He dealt with investors, suppliers, and what he called strategic partnerships. I should have paid more attention to those partnerships. See, Colin never understood that the recipes were the heart of everything. He thought if he knew the suppliers and got a few chefs to sign NDAs, he'd own the product. He saw spreadsheets and profit margins. I saw my grandmother's hands teaching me to fold ravioli. The first red flag was when he started pushing harder for recipe standardization. After years of casual suggestions, he became more insistent. Wanted everything written down, measured precisely, documented for quality control. "We need systems, Margaret," he'd say. "What if something happens to you? What if we want a franchise? I'm co-owner, but I can't even replicate our signature dishes." I resisted more firmly than ever. Call it intuition, call it protectiveness, but something felt wrong about reducing my family's legacy to a manual that anyone could steal. The second red flag was the late nights. "Investor meetings," he'd say. "Networking events." I was too busy managing 3 restaurants to question it. The third red flag was when he started questioning my involvement in day-to-day operations. "Maybe you should focus on the creative side," he'd suggest. "Let me handle the business decisions." But I wasn't just the creative side. I was the business. Every customer who came back, every positive review, every successful night, it all traced back to those recipes that lived in my memory, passed down through generations of strong Italian women. My parents, now in their 70s, still came in most days. Dad would fix whatever was broken, and Mom would supervise the marinara, tasting and adjusting until it was perfect. They were so proud of what we'd built together. Colin tolerated them, but I could see the impatience in his eyes. To him, they were just old people getting in the way of progress. I should have known then that we were heading for disaster. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Colin was in the shower, and his iPad was buzzing with notifications on the kitchen counter. Usually, I wouldn't look, but the screen was lit up with what looked like a legal document. That's when I saw it, an email thread between Colin and someone named Liam Webb-esque. The subject line read, "Ray, Rossi Bistro's Asset Division Strategy." My hands shook as I scrolled through the conversation. The key is establishing that the recipes are part of the business IP developed during marriage, Colin had written. She's emotional about them, but legally they're marital property. We go for a 50-50 split, but I retain operational control and IP rights. Liam Webb's response was even worse. Given your role in business development and her lack of formal business training, we can argue for majority control. The recipes are just ingredients and techniques, easily replicable with proper documentation. Easily replicable. My grandmother's ragu that took 6 hours to make properly. My mother's tiramisu that had customers driving 3 hours just to taste it. My own innovation on the gnocchi that had food critics calling it transcendent. Easily replicable. I kept reading, each message like a knife to my heart. What about the parents? Liam had asked. They're not legal owners, Colin replied. Sentimental value only. Once we have the recipes documented, their involvement becomes unnecessary. There was more, so much more. Colin had been skimming money from vendor contracts, taking kickbacks on supply orders, inflating costs and pocketing the difference. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. He'd also been having an affair. Her name was Jessica, and from the photos he'd sent her, she was everything I wasn't: young, blonde, and completely uninterested in pasta sauce or family traditions. Can't wait to be free of this small-town restaurant life, she'd texted him. Miami will be so much better for us. Miami. He was planning to take my family's legacy, sell it off, and move to Miami with his mistress. I sat there in my kitchen, surrounded by the smell of garlic and herbs from the day's prep work, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage. Rage would have been messy, emotional, reactive. This was something else, something calculating. I heard the shower turn off and quickly put the iPad back where I'd found it. When Colin came out, towel around his waist, I was calmly chopping vegetables for dinner. "Good day at the restaurants?" he asked, kissing the top of my head. "The usual," I said, not looking up from my cutting board. "How was your meeting with the Stevens group?" "Productive. They're very interested in expansion opportunities." Lies. According to his calendar, he'd spent the afternoon with Jessica at some hotel downtown. "That's wonderful," I said, my voice steady. "I'm so glad you're thinking about our future." He squeezed my shoulder. "Always, babe, always." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Colin slept peacefully beside me. He thought he'd been so clever, so careful. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. The next morning, I called my parents and asked them to meet me at the original bistro before opening. I told them everything: the divorce plans, the affair, the asset grab. My father's face went through several emotions. Surprise, hurt, anger, and then something I'd rarely seen from him: cold fury. "He thinks he can steal our recipes," Dad said, his Italian accent thicker when he was angry. "He thinks our legacy is just business." My mother was quieter, but I could see the steel in her eyes. "What do you need from us, Margaret?" "Help," I said. "And complete secrecy. Can you do that?" They both nodded. "Then let's save our family." I spent the next week putting together the most important business plan of my life. I met with 3 different divorce attorneys before finding Rebecca Wood, a shark who specialized in high-asset divorces involving family businesses. I also consulted with Catherine Gray, an IP specialist, and had long conversations with my accountant about asset protection. Colin, meanwhile, was getting sloppy. He'd been so confident in his plan that he'd stopped being careful. I found hotel receipts, noticed unexplained charges on our credit card, caught him in increasingly elaborate lies about his whereabouts. But I said nothing. I smiled when he kissed me goodbye in the mornings. I asked about his day when he came home late. I played the part of the trusting wife while I quietly dismantled his entire scheme. The key was understanding what he didn't. The recipes weren't just ingredients and techniques. They were intellectual property, and as such, they could be owned, licensed, and protected. But they had to be owned by the right entity. Working with my attorneys, I established a holding company called Rosa Maria Holdings, named after my grandmother and mother. The board consisted of me, my parents, and my godmother Teresa, who'd been like a sister to my mother since childhood. Then came the delicate part. I had to transfer the intellectual property, every recipe, every technique, every trade secret, out of the bistro company and into the holding company. This had to be done carefully, legally, and without Colin's knowledge. My IP attorney, Catherine Gray, worked closely with my divorce attorney, Rebecca Wood, to walk me through the process. We'll treat it like any other licensing deal, Catherine explained. The holding company owns the IP. The restaurants license it for use. Clean, legal, and absolutely bulletproof, Rebecca added. And since this is a legitimate business transaction completed before divorce proceedings, it's protected from being challenged as a fraudulent transfer. The beauty of it was that Colin had been so focused on the restaurant assets, the buildings, equipment, customer lists, that he'd never considered the recipes as separate property. In his mind, they were just part of the business. He was about to learn otherwise. I also discovered something else during my investigation. Colin had been setting up his own restaurant company in Miami. He'd already secured investors, found a location, and was planning to use my family's recipes as the foundation of his new venture. He wasn't just leaving me. He was stealing my heritage and selling it to the highest bidder. That's when I knew I had to take this nuclear. The filing came on a Thursday morning in April. I was at the main bistro, working on a new spring menu, when Colin called. "Margaret, we need to talk. I'm filing for divorce." I kept my voice steady. I figured this was coming when, "Today I'm having papers delivered to the restaurant." "Okay, I'll call my lawyer." "Margaret," his voice softened the way it did when he was about to manipulate me. "This doesn't have to be ugly. We can split everything fairly. You keep the restaurants, I take my share of the business value, we both move on." "Of course," I said. "I want this to be amicable too." He sounded relieved. "Good. I know this is hard, but it's better for both of us. You'll see." The papers arrived 2 hours later. I read through them with my divorce attorney Rebecca on speakerphone, Catherine Lynn beside me taking notes. Colin was going for a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the bistros. He wanted operational control of the businesses, given his superior business experience and education. He also wanted all intellectual property, trade secrets, and proprietary information associated with the restaurants. In other words, he wanted everything, and he wanted me to keep my mouth shut about it. "Are you ready for this?" Catherine asked. I looked around the restaurant my parents had built with their bare hands. The walls were covered with photos of our family, 3 generations of Rosses who'd poured their hearts into this place. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook. The dining room where I'd served my first customer. "Let's do it," I said. The mediation was scheduled for the following Monday. Colin strutted in wearing his most expensive suit, flanked by Marcus Webb and another attorney I didn't recognize. He looked confident, almost smug. I came with Rebecca Wood, my divorce attorney, and Catherine Lynn, my IP specialist, plus a single folder. "This should be straightforward," Marcus Webb began. "We're proposing a clean split. Mrs. Rossi retains ownership of the restaurant properties. Mr. Rossi receives equivalent value in business assets and intellectual property." Rebecca Wood opened my folder. "Actually, we have a problem with that." Colin frowned. "What kind of problem?" "The intellectual property," Rebecca said calmly. "The recipes, trade secrets, proprietary techniques, they're not part of the marital estate." Marcus Webb laughed. "Of course they are. They were developed during the marriage as part of the business operations." "No," Catherine Lynn interjected, sliding a document across the table. "They're owned by Rosa Maria Holdings, LLC, a separate legal entity established before the filing of divorce proceedings." I watched Colin's face as he read the licensing agreement. Confusion first, then understanding, then panic. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's a standard licensing agreement," I said quietly. "Rosa Maria Holdings owns all the intellectual property. The restaurants license it for use. It's been in effect for 2 weeks now." "You can't do this," Colin said, his voice rising. "Those recipes are mine too. I helped build this business." "You helped manage the business," Rebecca corrected, "but you never contributed to the actual intellectual property. The recipes predate your involvement by decades." They're family property, not marital property. Marcus Webb was frantically reading through the documents. This is clearly a fraudulent transfer. She's trying to hide assets. Actually, Catherine said, it's a legitimate business transaction. Rosa Maria Holdings is owned by Mrs. Rossi's family members, her parents and godmother. Mrs. Rossi herself doesn't even hold a majority stake. The transaction occurred at fair market value with proper documentation. Colin's face was turning red. Margaret, you can't do this. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I said. You wanted the business assets. You can have them, but my family's recipes were never yours to take. What happens if you don't renew the licensing agreement? Marcus Webb asked. Catherine smiled. Then the restaurants will have to operate without the recipes. Of course, that would probably impact their value significantly. You're destroying the business out of spite, Colin accused. No, I said, standing up. I'm protecting my family's legacy from someone who never deserved it. The room fell silent. Colin stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. The recipes are gone, I continued. I've already removed them from all the restaurant systems. Your investors in Miami, they might want to reconsider their funding when they realize you can't deliver what you promised. Colin's face went white. How did you? I know about Jessica. I know about the Miami restaurant. I know about the money you've been skimming from vendor contracts. I know everything, Colin. He slumped back in his chair, the fight going out of him. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to accept a settlement of 10% of the current business value. That's generous, considering the fraud you've committed. In exchange, I won't press charges for embezzlement. 10%? Marcus Webb sputtered. That's ridiculous. It's more than he deserves, Rebecca said, and it's more than he'll get if this goes to court and the embezzlement comes to light. Colin looked defeated. The Miami investors will pull out. That's not my problem, I said. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from your wife and her family. The mediation ended with Collins signing the agreement. He walked out without looking back, his dreams of restaurant empire crumbling around him. I sat in the conference room afterward, feeling oddly empty. 10 years of marriage ended with signatures on legal documents. You did the right thing, Rebecca said afterward, while Catherine nodded in agreement. He would have destroyed everything your family built. I know, I said, but it still hurts. Of course it does, but now you can rebuild, on your own terms. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Collins' Miami investors pulled their funding within 48 hours of the mediation, just as I'd predicted. Word travels fast in the restaurant industry, and news of his deception spread quickly. I spent my time retraining staff and getting the Bistros back to full operational capacity. My parents threw themselves into the work with renewed energy, as if saving the family legacy had given them a new purpose. The signing of the final divorce papers was anticlimactic. Colin looked hollow, defeated. He'd lost everything he'd schemed for and ended up with a fraction of what he might have gotten through an honest divorce. I hope you're happy, he said as we left the courthouse. I'm not happy, I told him, but I'm free. He moved to Miami anyway, but without investors or stolen recipes, his restaurant dreams died quickly. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd tried to start a food truck, but reviews were brutal. Turns out, knowing about profit margins doesn't make you a chef. Jessica left him 3 months later, apparently uninterested in supporting a failed restaurateur. As for me, I threw myself into the bistros with renewed passion. We reopened as fully family-owned restaurants, with new signage that read Rosa Maria's. Family-owned since 1987. The day we unveiled the new signs, I saw my father tear up. My mother hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Your grandmother would be so proud, she whispered. We added new dishes to the menu, recipes that had been passed down through generations, but never made it into the restaurant rotation. My godmother, Teresa, who'd been silent during the crisis, suddenly became our most active board member, bringing her own family recipes into the mix. The business thrived. Without Colin's expensive, strategic initiatives and skimming, our profit margins improved dramatically. We were able to give our longtime employees raises and invest in kitchen upgrades. Food critics who'd been reviewing us for years noticed the difference. Rosa Maria's has returned to its roots, one wrote. The food tastes like it's made with love again. 6 months after the divorce, I got a call from a major food magazine wanting to feature our story. Not the revenge story that stayed private, but the story of a family business surviving and thriving in an industry where most restaurants fail within 2 years. The photographer captured 2 generations of Rossi women working side by side in the kitchen. My mother rolling pasta, me stirring sauce, like we did for years. That photo now hangs in the main dining room of all 3 bistros. Colin tried to contact me once, about a year after the divorce. He was back in town, he said, and wanted to apologize. I didn't respond. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, only survived. 2 years later, I'm happier than I've been in a decade. The bistros are thriving, my family is closer than ever, and I've found love again with Anthony, a local farmer who supplies our vegetables. He's a widower who understood heartbreak and healing, and he gets that some things are more important than profit margins. We married last spring in a small ceremony at the original bistro, surrounded by family and the smell of fresh bread. My 4-year-old stepdaughter June already calls me Mama Margaret and loves helping me roll pasta on weekends. And with our daughter due in December, the Rossi legacy is set to continue into another generation. The recipes are safe, still memorized, still passed down through the women in my family, and now June is learning them too, just like I did at her age. They'll never be written down, never be franchised, never be turned into intellectual property for corporate acquisition. They're exactly what they've always been. Love made tangible, tradition made edible, family made permanent. Colin thought he could steal that. He thought he could reduce decades of heritage to a business transaction. He learned the hard way that some things can't be bought, can't be copied, and can't be taken. You can steal names. You can forge contracts. You can manipulate people and break hearts. But you can't replicate legacy. And if you try to take what doesn't belong to you, don't be surprised when the very thing you're trying to steal becomes the weapon that destroys you. The sauce, as they say, always knows. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to share this video and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more incredible revenge stories coming your way. What would you have done differently in Margaret's situation? Let me know in the comments below.